MSNBC is really, I mean, it's not just MSDNC. It's MS. I don't know. I don't know. Is it MS Neoliberal? I mean, I'm trying to think of something cunning to say. It's beyond MSDNC at this point. MSNBC is literally taking the talking points of Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton. MSNBC is literally an arm of the not just the corporate Democratic Party, but essentially the Russiagate hysteria complex. And now that, according to Real Clear Politics, which again, I mean, as Status Quo has been covering for a while now, we take the polls. A lot of these polls we take with a grain of salt. A lot of these polls, the sampling is too low. They oversample older voters. They undersample younger voters. But Bernie's surge, he is now back in on Real Clear Politics average of polls, back in second. You got Biden, according to Real Clear Politics, average of all the national polls, up by 10. Bernie in second. Warren in third. Buttigieg in a distant fourth. You got Bernie right in there. This is Iowa. Again, I take Iowa of all the early states. I take these polls with a grain of salt. There is a, I think, significant Bernie vote that is not showing up in these polls. You have in the Real Clear Politics average of polls, Buttigieg 23.5, Warren 17.8, Sanders 17.0, Biden 17.0. So basically, essentially, Warren, Sanders, Biden tied in second. Tied for second at 17. I mean, Warren's at 17.8, Sanders 17.0, Biden 17.0, Buttigieg at 23.5. I don't believe Buttigieg is at 23.5 in an average of the polls, but Bernie's right there in Iowa. Then you have New Hampshire, average of polls, Warren 20.7, Biden 19, Buttigieg 18.7. They have Bernie at 14.3. I kind of find it hard to believe that Bernie's at 14.3. Again, a lot of these New Hampshire polls that Real Clear Politics is averaging is essentially 250 to 300 people, and mostly people over the age of 50. But I would say it's closer to Bernie at 17, 18 in New Hampshire. You have Nevada, again, grain of salt, 29.0 for Biden, Warren at 20, Sanders 19.8, Buttigieg 7.3, and California, Biden 25.3, Warren 23.0, Sanders 19.3. So why I list the average of the polls is I truly believe that it's essentially right now a toss-up in most of these states. I think in Iowa right now, if the Iowa caucus was held today, I do not believe whoever became the winner would win by more than 2 points. I think it's going to be that close in Iowa. New Hampshire, if it were held today, I have a hard time believing whoever wins would win by more than 2 to 3 points. South Carolina, I think Joe Biden will win South Carolina. I mean, it is what it is. Older black people support Joe Biden. I think if Joe Biden loses Iowa and New Hampshire, that support might go down. I still think he would win South Carolina, barring a complete meltdown. But I think Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and California are essentially toss-ups right now. I really do. And I think that because of that, MSNBC is going out of its way to throw anything at the wall to see what sticks. They obviously, in the last debate, you had them essentially, as I reported this week, covering for Warren. They pretended that she didn't just moonwalk away from Medicare for All. They didn't even bring it up. Buttigieg, they didn't lay a glove on Buttigieg. I think that Bernie, they didn't call on that much. And when they did call on Bernie, it was for questions that didn't really make sense. Andrew Yang, who isn't my cup of tea, they clearly, I think it took them a half hour to call on Andrew Yang. I also think, when you look at reality, they were calling on Amy Klobuchar, Tom Steyer, Booker, who are all polling lower than Andrew Yang, way more than him. So MSNBC essentially through Maddow and the other moderators, are trying to basically resuscitate or give some type of life, whatever that machine is, to save some of these struggling campaigns. And now, in, again, any way possible to defeat Bernie Sanders. Obviously, it's been a campaign against Tulsi Gabbard. Now they're enlisting Joy Reid. Joy Reid, who, it's just because it's MSNBC. She lied 1 year ago. She said her blog was hacked or something like that, and she didn't write those homophobic, nasty things. Now they're enlisting Joy Reid and Rachel Maddow is next to resuscitate Russiagate. MSDNC, as you can tell by the shirt, what are they going to do? Bernie, his crowds, as you see, are through the roof. Bernie, I mean, he's going up in the national polls. He's been going up in Iowa polls. A new Emerson poll this week had him tied with Joe Biden in the lead. That Emerson poll also had Bernie Sanders as the only candidate head-to-head defeating Donald Trump. Slim margin by 2, I believe it was. But Joe Biden was losing to Donald Trump. Elizabeth Warren was losing to Donald Trump. So what are they going to do? Joy Reid. Let's take a look at Joy Reid and her alternate reality that aired yesterday on MSDNC.
Right now, Russia's security services and their proxies have geared up to repeat their interference in the 2020 election. We're running out of time to stop them.
Witnesses at this week's impeachment hearing sounded the alarm about the threat of Russian interference in the 2020 election. And new data from the Foreign Policy Research Institute shows that Russia has already chosen its favorite and least favorite Democratic candidates. After analyzing more than 1,700 stories from Russian state media outlets, researchers found that Tulsi Gabbard, not so surprisingly, received the most favorable mentions among the 2020 field. And joining me now is Clint Watts, former FBI agent and research fellow, and he's the research fellow responsible for the report. So, Clint, we were just talking a little bit about it in the break. So Tulsi is getting the most positive focus. Yeah, out of all the mentions that we've looked at, she doesn't receive an overwhelming amount, but what she does is far more positive than what we've seen of the other candidates. And what are the mentions like? Talking about her in what way? Mostly in terms of her rhetoric that she says about the U.S. government, its war stance, that it is aggressive or imperialist. That's sort of the nature of it. That the U.S. should stay out of places like Syria, which matches what Russia wants. Russia does not want the U.S. in Syria anymore. And that really we should withdraw from the world, which is a message that Russia wants Americans saying to Americans. So it's a great opportunity for them. Yeah, she uses the term regime change wars a lot, which is a common term, in my understanding, of the way that Russia talks about the United States. If you listen to that rhetoric, you would think that the U.S. started a war in Syria, which did not happen. That was part of the Arab Spring. If you remember, if we rewind all of this, that war has been going on for so long now that was part of the Tunisian, Libyan, Egyptian, Syria, Yemen. There are many uprisings that happened during that time. The U.S. didn't start those. So now let's talk about the person who gets the most negative mentions, and that is Joe Biden. Yes. And give me the nature of that. So there's two things to look at with that chart that you put up there. The first thing is just the total number of mentions. So Biden is 5 or 6 times more than like a Gabbard or most of the rest of the field. Right. And those are much more negative. So I always tell people when they look at that chart, most of what RT or Sputnik does is very much like U.S. news, right? About 70% is going to be neutral. So I look to see, okay, when do they move off that neutral 70% and change? When do the percentages start to change? And that's what sticks out with Biden. Overwhelmingly negative. Lots of content about Biden, even when he wasn't really doing that well. And I would probably tell you, proportionally to what you'd see in U.S. news, they talk about him more. The Russians don't waste time in their overt news talking about candidates they don't care about. So it's really fascinating to me is Elizabeth Warren. They hardly mentioned her for months, and only in the past couple months have they started to talk about her. And surprisingly, it's been more negative than I would have expected it to. Well, because if she were to defeat Donald Trump, that would defeat their interest, right? Their interest is Donald Trump being president. That's where there's been some weirdness when you watch her over media, because they speak of her as if sometimes she's like part of Hillary Clinton, right? And you go, well, if you're in the United States, it doesn't quite make sense. And you'll see that pop up sometimes even in the social media feed. If that wasn't enough for you, that was only part 1. I got one more part to play, but I wanted to address this part. So
what's so interesting to me about this is basically what MSNBC is doing is trying to create a narrative that's different from what's actually happening in the country right now. I'm not saying that Russia has no interest in our election. I'm not saying that Russia doesn't push propaganda online, on Facebook, on YouTube, on wherever. I'm not saying that Russia isn't going to try and, quote unquote, sow discord in the 2020 election. No, not dissimilar than the United States does in other countries. What MSNBC is trying to do is they're trying to take that reality that Russia, a foreign country, who, by the way, we have built up the war machine against Russia since the Cold War and have basically tried to reignite the Cold War in recent years. They're trying to make it seem that Russia trying to influence the election, keep Trump, is the deciding factor in whether, like, a Bernie Sanders rises or a Joe Biden loses. Because that's a much easier narrative. It's a much easier narrative than the narrative that is clear and obvious, like what Michael Moore said on MSNBC this week. I wanted to play this clip with Michael Moore and kind of juxtapose what Michael Moore is saying on MSNBC, which, by the way, as soon as he was saying it, they tried to cut him off, with the narrative coming from the Joy Reids, and I'm sure Rachel Maddow is going to jump on the bandwagon too very soon, that, oh, Russia is trying to prop up Tulsi, trying to prop up Bernie, really trying to knock down Biden, and that's what we really need to be afraid of. It's not like on their own Tulsi has support. It's not like on their own Bernie has a giant movement. It's not like on their own the pretty much near majority of the country is just sick of the status quo. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.